G'day guys and girls. Today we have no meme intro because this is 100% serious, this video. This is my masterclass in ground vehicle combat for 2042. Now what I'm going to be covering over in this video is first of all giving you an idea of what the best loadouts are currently in the game on this build, as well as some damage values of what their loadouts are at the moment. So in other words, how much damage they would do versus certain vehicles, and also where to shoot and what kind of strategies you can apply to get maximum kill potential, survivability, and most importantly, being effective in helping your team out and winning the game on the battlefield. The loadouts that we'll be covering today is for the MPAT as well as the Wildcat. So if at any point today you find something useful, learn something, or have more general questions, subscribe, leave a comment and like, and be in tune for my next videos. Let's get to it. So currently in this build of the game there are two heavy vehicles that you can deploy on the battlefield. One being the MPAT, which comes in the variation of the T28, as well as a futuristic version of the M1 Abram. And also we have a hybrid of what seems to be a combination of the IFV and the AA, if they would have a love child. Both of these vehicles have loadouts that are extremely effective and basically meta, as well as other loadouts that are completely useless, and you might as well use something else because you're basically hindering yourself in a couple of situations. So what we will be covering over first is just the loadouts that I think that are worthwhile, and most importantly that will contribute to being useful to helping your team, winning your 1v1 scenarios, as well as contributing to a win to the game, as well as increasing your survivability. So what we'll be doing first, let's go over the MPAT. Now what I'm going to do is highlight with a red box around the particular item I think is useful, so that you understand exactly what overall, very quickly, what I think is worthwhile using. But just do remember, while I'm talking through this, I'm going to be talking about some of the other features in this game as far as loadouts go, why I don't want to use them as much, and what scenarios they might be useful in, just so that you have some ideas of how to think outside the box and make them useful. Now I have applied timestamps to this whole entire video, so if you just want to get a quick information on exactly what the loadout is to use, just use that, and so then you're saving yourself time. So this is going to be the loadout that you're going to use most of the time, just to make this clear. You're going to be using the MPAT shell. It's just generally the best overall shell. It has generous splash damage and has generous damage against vehicles, and has a very decent shell velocity and doesn't have much shell drop to it. It is better than the HE shell, and it's also better than the staff shell. The reasons why: staff shell doesn't have much splash damage against infantry, so there's infantry that are basically immune to you completely, with given how the hitboxes in this game are very glitchy still at the moment. The heat rounds generally have better potential killing infantry and have a faster reload rate, but you will find that you'll lose 1v1s with other tanks even with the extra reload time, and there's very few loadouts that can actually help you beat the MPAT as well. So you're going to be also using the HMG. The reason why is because it has better damage drop off over range and has a better general time to kill compared to the LMG. Yes, you can hold the LMG down longer and it doesn't overheat, but with a bit of general skill and learning a little bit of the lead on the HMG, that completely makes that obsolete, and you will be better off with this. As far as equipment slot 1 goes, you're going to be using thermal smoke package, and the reason why it achieves the same result as package 1 and 2, being the smoke launcher and discharger, but not as effective as the smoke coverage as of the other two. But what you'll be gaining back from that is you'll be able to block laser lock-ons, which is pretty much the only thing to use if you're in aircraft or playing anti-tank roles at range. It will save you from all of that while you try and find a better position to break the laser lock-on. And there is literally no other choice for equipment slot 2, so there's no other choice. Just pick that and you'll be fine. Now when it comes to the weapon station, what you're going to be using, and my personal choice, tow missile is the best. It will be able to do extra damage to vehicles. You can seat switch with it and take out enemy aircraft, as well as I've already emphasized, put in that extra bit of damage against vehicles and 1v1s. If you're finding that you're never really getting into vehicle fights, your best choice would be the HMG, and the reason why is it has better damage drop off over range. It's generally more accurate than a minigun, and it does damage to soft vehicle targets. So you'll find this will be actually a bit more useful in shooting down the C4 drones, which if they know how to use it properly, there actually is no real counter to it and you will be destroyed. That's just how it works in this game, so you're going to have to kind of deal with that at this point. I'll go into the details a bit more of some of the weapon pods, because this is actually very interesting, which I'll cover a little bit later in the video when it comes to the strategies that you can apply, because there's some very interesting things I've found out about this so far. But as far as I will recommend, overall for general use, you're going to be using this. You're going to be using the kinetic grenade launcher, but I'll be covering later in the video something very unique that you might want to consider as well. Now we're going to be covering the loadout for the Wildcat. Now this one does kind of have a two-choice option for the meta loadout for this, but honestly you can get away with using the 40mm cannons. It does have a bit more generous, forgiving nature, having more shells to shoot out at the infantry, as well as doing some damage to aircraft, being able to have some decent velocity on it to track them. But the 57mm cannon does way more damage to vehicles, it does way more damage to aircraft, and has a great generous velocity to it, so it's quite easy to track aircraft, as well as the ability to one-tap infantry players. You will find that people that are not using the correct loadout when it comes to the MBT with the thermal smoke, you will be able to pair this with the 57mm cannon and the anti-tank missiles and basically win every 1v1 in a head-on. Yes, I mean it by 1v1 head-on. This will kill the MBT in a fair 1v1 every single time, as long as they're not running thermal smoke package. Now, as far as the rest of the loadout goes, once again, you're going to be using the thermal smoke package, and there is no other choice for equipment slot 2. So you have to use repair system. You might be able to get away with running the anti-aircraft missile if you're not really having situations where you're having a hard ordeal versus enemy armor. So if you're finding that more talented aircraft that know what they're doing, sitting at the top of the skybox, out of your range of your cannon, you might as well use the anti-aircraft missiles to counteract that. Paired with the 57mm and you'll be fine. Station, your choice will be the 40mm grenade launcher. It just has a great ability to kill infantry and provide that extra cover. When people are trying to anti-tank against you, re-peek you, you just shoot a grenade in their general facility and they won't be able to re-peek you whatsoever. You can once again choose between the heavy machine gun or the minigun, but I would choose the heavy machine gun, being more accurate, better damage drop off, and you'll be able to track the drones a little bit more easier. As far as weapon pods go, you would actually use the kinetic grenade pod launcher for it, because once again, if you're already pairing the weapon station with the other kinetic grenade launcher and then this, you're basically going to be spamming out so many nades that it's going to be a horrible time for infantry picking you at very close ranges. And with paired with the 57mm cannon with that one-shot hit potential, it's just absolute a nightmare for infantry to counteract that. So just use that for the rest of your ability. Keep the infantry at range generally, and anyone that gets lucky enough close to you, they're just going to eat all those nades. So that's the loadout that you want to be using for the Wildcat, in my opinion. Now, before we get into some general values in the game about as regards to what damage is being put out, scenarios, techniques, and other interesting facts that I found about the vehicles in this game, we're going to go over my settings because it's something that you guys have been asking a lot about. Just to get this out of the way really quickly, sensitivity doesn't really matter. It's what you feel comfortable with that matters the most. Since this is not like Battlefield 3, 4, or 1 where the turrets basically have a 1-to-1 ratio and there's no real delay in how the turret moves around. If this was like previous Battlefield titles, I would highly recommend matching your hip or one-time scope to what your vehicle sensitivity is, but because that's not relevant, maybe playing with a little bit of a higher sensitivity so it might actually boost the speed of the turret. I don't know personally if they all really noticed that it made much of a difference. We'll get to that in a sec. So let's go into some of our display settings. What you want to be taking note of most personally is the third person field of view. You want to put that up as high as possible so you can get general information around you a bit more better. As far as field of view goes, you can get away with it higher, but I would highly recommend not putting it in the lower range. I put it at 85 because there's a balance between being able to track my targets and have a nice little big object to shoot at versus the information that I'm taking in around me. So somewhere between 80 to 90 in my opinion is probably the sweet spot. But once again, it comes up to personal preference. You want to try and get rid of motion blur and all these filters as well. You don't want to have any of that stuff. As far as your crosshead, you want something that really is easy for you to see. Once again, it's something that comes up to your personal choice and what you like. As far as minimap goes, you want to have it set it up so that you can actually see what's on it, because you might be having to drive in reverse and being able to see what objects are behind you. You can use that as a skill kind of to, when you're trying to get out of situations, you can just look at the map and just drive backwards and it's no problem. But with how the turret and the free cam works now, that's not really an issue. You can just drive straight backwards, but that's a skill that's in previous titles that was actually really relevant to learn, but in this game it's not. So it is what it is. As far as graphics settings go, you want to put this all down to low because you want to have better performance in game and have less information cluttering up your screens so that you can see what's going on as well. As far as key bindings go, I literally actually run default for this game. If the mouse input buttons actually worked in this game, I would have actually be using those to switch between my primary and secondary ammo types, etc. But once again, because they're not actually functional in the build of this game, there's no point doing that. So once again, try and set up your key bindings to be relevant to what you feel comfortable with. If you find there's something that you kind of struggle with, maybe you accidentally hit the E key every time and get out of the vehicle and things like that, change it up so that it sets up and it's more comfortable for you to fixing up those errors in your gameplay style. As far as I have, it's just default. There's no secret that I have right here at this point in time. The only thing I really changed about here is I buffed this up to 150. It just feels a little bit more responsive, and I left the gun sensitivity as the same because I want to have the same sensitivity overboard. When I jump into that, I know exactly what I'm expecting, how it's going to operate when I use the tow rocker or using the other gun seat. If you find that it's a way bit too sensitive for you, just drop that back down and then so you can control it a little bit more. But that's totally, once again, sensitivity. Just long story short, your personal choice and preference. Now, another setting that I had tried to have a look for, but it wasn't very clear exactly where it was the decouple turret system. So as you can see here, my turret was turning with my chassis of my vehicle. But what this setting I'm looking for does is simply it allows for you to turn the tank around and the turret actually doesn't move, so you don't actually have to move your mouse whatsoever. And the reason why that's an important feature, it actually improved your aim while being mobile as well. And it looks like that's not even in the game. So it's a little bit frustrating. Anyway, that's all the settings that I'm going to go over for now. If I missed any, put it in the comment section below and I'll get back to you about them. Now we're going to go on to doing damage values, and the reason why this is important is this will increase the time to kill against enemy vehicles, and if you can increase that time to kill, you're more likely to win your 1v1s and be more efficient. Now what we're testing out here is to see if there's angle damage drop off. So simply, if you shoot at a perfect 90-degree angle to the front of the vehicle, it's going to do max damage. If you do it from the side on and the angle is worse and worse, you're going to do less damage. Hence, angling your tank is a good idea so that you don't get damaged as much. From what we can find in the early tests that we've done so far, this doesn't exist as shown below. Yeah.
I'm going to come alongside you and shoot nearly side on at the front.
Wow, it's just flat. It's flat damage.
Yeah.
Now what this means simply is there's no reason to angle your tank in this game, which in almost every other single battlefield, this was like the bare basics of a skill gap. So if you angled your tank, you would take less damage, thus increasing your chance of winning a 1v1 if their tank is not aiming properly or taking better positioning to get maximum damage on you. So it's really unfortunate that they've lowered the skill gap in this game. Now the only thing that you need to take in is 1. Shooting the front of the tank where the chassis is will actually do less damage, which is 22 damage, and you will do a grand total of 28 damage to the side of the tank if you shoot the chassis or the turret. You will also be doing an exactly 35 damage to the back of the tank if you shoot at it as well. So the goal is, if you want to do more damage from the front of the tank, you should be aiming at the turret as shown in this. Alright, so do that again. Shoot the turret. 72.
Yeah, body is 72.
Yeah, so I'm on 72 health.
Yeah.
And shoot my chassis.
And then I shoot body. 72, right?
Nope, 78.
Oh, there you go.
So wrapping it up, if you shoot the front plate, it's going to only do 22 damage. So you want to get side shots and aim for the turret as much as you can, and try and get a back shot. Now, it looks like the tow rocket does a grand total of 16 damage to the chassis and the turret of the tank from the left, right, or the front, with a total of 25 damage to the back. Now for the heat rounds, the damage values are the following. It will be 12 damage to the front plate of the tank, with a total of 15 damage to the turret and the sides of the tank as well, and with a grand total of 18 damage to the back of the tank. We'll cover in a sec which shell's the best one, but we've got one more shell to go through, so let's have a look at it. No surprise that the Star Shell has very little potential against infantry, but what I found very interesting, it's pretty much a downgrade of the MPAT in every single way possible. It does way less damage, significantly from different angles, and it just overall is just a user-friendly. So if you can't aim properly, it's going to be the shell that you will be using, but to be honest, it is really not that hard to aim against tanks in 1v1s, so the only counter argument you could use for this is if there's a whole bunch of smoke and you have no idea what you're shooting at. Now what we also tried to test out is some of the features in previous battlefields. So in Battlefield 5, if you shoot at the tracks of the vehicle, it actually counted as a back shot, doing increased damage. It was very similar to the glitch shot in Battlefield 4, it was just in a different position. And in this game, that's not a thing as of yet. Who knows what happens when they break the game every patch. It also didn't seem to be that there was a difference between factions as well, so we tried that. Also, there seems to be a little bit of discrepancy with the hitbox, or that the turret when firing a shell will actually have a bit of recoil to it, and it would kick up and fire, and then the projectile would come out. This as well, we were trying to test out to see if the Battlefield 3/4 glitch shot was also in the game as well. It doesn't seem to be in the game, or I just haven't discovered the sweet spot yet. The reason why I care about this is because it added another skill gap for the tank and actually made firing at specific points on the tank very relevant. Because I don't know about you, but shooting the tank in the back, that's pretty easy. So having something that's about the size of a pinhole or a head on the tank and shooting that specifically, doing extra damage, I think is worthwhile to improve the skill gap as well. Now that we've got most of the damage values out of the way, I will cover the weapon pods a little bit later because not much of them are really interesting except from a minor few discrepancies, so that you can see if there's any personal interest that you guys have more in the details. So, what we were trying to debate as well while we're doing some of the testing, what exactly is the meta strategy, especially at close range, which normally doesn't happen because with how aggressive gameplay works in this game, you're actually very heavily punished for it, and there's a lot of counter play to aggressive tanks, and tanks in general as well. So what we figured out, the main meta is to try and bait them out to use their system repair, which normally is used to regain control of a disabled part, and then take full advantage of this, especially if you can close the gap. So, what you generally want to do is, you can see in this gameplay playing in the video right now, is your first two shots generally wanting to go towards the turret. And the reason why that is, if they panic, they will use it to repair that turret and be able to gain control of it. But your follow-up shot, which is doing more damage to the front of the tank anyway, will take full advantage and then re-disable it again. And then you want to keep going, shoot them in the track so they can't traverse the track, and then you'll be able to shoot them in the back. But that's if you can get into these closer ranges. But this is just some side notes for you to take into account, so that if you ever end up into this situation, you know exactly what to do and not to panic. Now the next thing that we're going to cover is a major difference between the MPAT rounds and the heat rounds given the reload time. Now in testing, when comparing the MPAT shell to the HE, pretty much every single time, actually 99% of the time, the heat rounds will lose out to the AP shell, even though they shoot way more shells at a time over a period of time. It just doesn't keep up with the damage output of the MPAT shell. Now the next thing that we also need to cover as well is that the heat rounds actually take 2 shells to disable any part on the vehicle, which is actually pretty critical, especially in close range engagements where you can take full advantage of disabling certain parts of the vehicle. Now that we have completed the MBT part of this video, we're going to be going over the Wildcat now, as well as finally finishing up with the Specialist and what kind of loadout you should be running as utility in the tank, as well as some nifty things that I learnt along the way while testing. Now, the Hellcat does 11 damage per shell with a grand total of 32 damage in total to the front plate with the 57 millicannon. And then it does a 14 per shell damage with a grand total of 168 damage per total for a clip to the turret, sides and the back of the tank, which when you come to think of it, that is a lot of damage compared to the tank. Now the anti-tank missile does a grand total of 32 damage per rocket with a grand total of 64 damage, which is quite huge, especially if they don't run thermal smoke, which means they won't be able to break the lock whatsoever. The only thing that you have to worry about here is making sure that you're not too close to the vehicle, because when you fire the rockets, and if you're too close, the rockets actually won't connect with your target. So you need to keep a little bit of range just so that they can both get off and do damage to the vehicle. Now, if they're running thermal smoke, they're going to be able to negate one of these rockets, so do take that into consideration. Now we decided to do some testing of the MPAT shell against the Hellcat, and we found that 26 damage was hit to the front of the plate, 34 to the turret and the sides, and with a grand total of 42 damage to the back of the tank. So it's still more optimal to shoot at the turret still at all angles until you get the side on shot and then can get behind them. So we decided to do some more testing because it just sounds too good to be true that Wildcat is actually better at armor engagements than the tank. So the following footage that you're going to see here is using the anti-tank missiles followed up by the 57mm cannon and who wins the engagement. This is if the tank was not running thermal smoke, which would normally block one of the shell shots. And as you can see here, I win easily. There is almost no competition, which leads me to my next test. Can you just beat the tank with the 57? Well, I have some news for you. When you use a 57mm along with the repair system and time it towards the end of the engagement, you will actually win this fight. Every time. This is excluding if you switch to the second seat and use whatever extra utility damage that you have, but disregard that for now. Just the main cannon can actually fair and squarely beat a tank in a head-on, which is wild, pun intended. Which gives me the reasoning that maybe 57mm cannon plus heat seekers plus all the other utility that you have will make you the anti-everything vehicle. You have the ability to 1v1 tanks with your 57mm as well as one-tap infantry, and paired with the heat seekers and turn all aircrafts running from you. And also, given that the 57mm does exactly 65 damage to light aircraft such as the Nightbird and the attack chopper, and can do some serious damage to the Osprey as well. You probably also could hit 2 or 3 tap a jet with this as well if you got the opportunity as well. This honestly is better than the hovercraft, or especially now that the hovercraft gets 2 tapped now, but before that, this has gone under the radar. Now let's get this out of the way with, because it's pretty easy and straightforward and will take up a little time. When you're running your tank, you want to make sure you're running a repair tool, and that's about it. So the other things you could consider is what specialist you're running. As far as I can see, the specialist abilities don't carry on into the vehicle, so you do not get wall hacks with a certain particular character. What you want to use simply is just Rayo. Rayo only has the ability to disable electronics, so if you happen to get the drop on the C4 drone, you might be able to get out and use it and then get back in. But in practicality, you're putting yourself at a lot of risk, and it's not as reliable as you think you can do, especially if they move the drone and swerve around. It's a little bit harder to lock onto it. And also, if someone knows how to use the C4 drone properly, it can actually fly up to the skybox to 200 meters and then just come out down on you. So there is no real counter besides from getting out and maybe shooting at it, but as you can see, that's a bit more harder than expected. While carrying out other tests, we found out that there was abilities that were not intended in the game. One of the ones that I uncovered was vehicles that are unoccupied will be unable to lock on at all. And what I mean by this is, so if you have a wire guided rocket, maybe a soft lam or a laser guide from an aircraft, it won't be actually able to lock onto the vehicle. I don't know exactly how thorough this is. So for example, if you lock on before they get out and then basically get it at the last minute, if that negates that. But either way, as soon as they start locking on, maybe get out for a split second and that will break the lock completely. Now, to cover other basics and things that we need to cover. So, first of all, you need to know which side of the vehicle you get out of. And to understand why this is important, is simply getting out on one side of the vehicle will determine if you end up getting killed or not. As you can see here, I'm thoroughly testing out what ways you can get out of the vehicle, and it all seems to dump you out on the left hand side. So the only way that you can change this up is if you find an object that will cause that spawn when you get out of the vehicle to go to the other side, as you can see in this footage right here. So I was trying to find out where the sweet spot of it is here, and it looks around about like the middle of the vehicle. If you put that next to an object, it will trigger you to spawn on the other side, which is very useful because you want to spawn on the side that you're not facing the enemy. Now, how to counter out this in the open? Well, if you've got no objects to really hide behind so that you don't get shot at, all you're going to do is peel your tank to the left, exit, and you're safe. Your enemy will be in front of you, but will not be able to shoot you. Can be inherently risky if you're in a 1v1 and you get shot out or shot from the side and flanked. So the best recommendation on top of this is to pop your smoke as well, so that it lowers the chance of you being shot as well. Now, if you're not running the smoke loadout, simply all you're going to be doing is equipping smoke to your player on your specialist, which means when you get out of the vehicle, you just throw a smoke nade at your feet and it achieves the same result, and you have thermal smoke which can block lock-ons at the same time. Now, while we're still covering the topic of the repair tool, there's one thing you need else to take in as well, that there is actually a cooldown time on the repair tool, which means you cannot hold it indefinitely down and keep on repairing. There will be a point where it would overheat and then it will have to reset. Now, this is important because you don't want to be in a scenario where you're halfway through a fight, your repair tool burns over the top and you can't use it and then you end up dying. So do take the chance, if you have the chance, to simply reset the timer on it and then get back on in. Now, earlier in the game there was a bug where if you got into the vehicle and the repair tool was overheated or had been used prior, it would not actually cool down after a significant amount of time while inside of the vehicle, which was really annoying. But it's going to get patched out soon and fixed up, so that won't be an issue so much anymore, so you won't have to multi-manage that. Now, the next thing I'm demonstrating here is seat switching. Since I've got the tow launcher, I switch to my secondary, shoot it, and then I shoot at my shell again. You'll find that you'll be able to get a bit more damage off in a 1v1 scenario, giving you the edge. Now, this is also useful if you're using the HMG as well. So if you have infantry behind you which your turret can't turn fast enough to kill, you just simply seat switch and you turn on them and delete them. Just do take note that it is a bit of hit reg issues with regards to the hitboxes. There's been a couple of times where I've just sprayed at the enemy and the hit shots will not register, which I'll show you in this clip.
Don't stop.
Yeah, so that's also a thing. Good work, Dice. Anyway, now to cover some other minor things. So if you're a gunner in a tank, you want to be the eyes and ears that the tank does not have. And what I mean by that is simply watching the angles that the turret is not already watching. So you want to try and take note of where the turret is facing. You can see there for a split second, I look forward, I see that's where he's looking, so there's no point for me to look that direction, right? Because he's already dealing with that angle. So what I should be worrying about simply is where he's not looking, because the turret doesn't turn as fast as the secondary on top of the tank. So what you're trying to do is increase the survivability of the tank by having the ability to watch and direct your fire output in more than one direction. And if you do that, a lot of successful tanking rounds, or yet alone gunning for your fellow tanker, will end up being a success more. You're basically his second eyes, his ears, and giving the information and protecting his backside. Now also, this is a decent clip that I got here with the bots, because the bots don't really get how this game works. It's created by DICE, so figures. That one thing that you just saw right there, that vehicle was in a 1v1 and drove off from me when I had repairs. If you are tanking and you know that you have a guy that's actually doing a decent job of getting out and repairing, stand your ground. This is huge. You will generally win your 1v1s in this scenario. There'll be obviously a couple of scenarios where you might actually have to leave him and for him to die. But one thing I've picked up on some competitive tankers back from Battlefield 3 and 4, such as Tonk 2 Strong and Cerealno, I would like to give their names some credit by actually saying their names. One of the things that you can do as a gunner is to increase the survivability of the tank is basically taking the bullet for your own tank. Now, to touch quickly on another topic as well is terrain and your hitbox. So, to increase the survivability of your tank, you want to use your terrain to your advantage, as well as how to mask your tank's hitbox. So this is a really good example here. You may not find this on every single map, but this is just to get your brain sparking, so then it can induce your creative side as how to approach engagements. You can see here, I can still generally shoot over this object, but as you can see at the very front of it, I have a very, very small hitbox that they can look at. And if it's at range, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to see where I'm shooting from before they can figure out. And if you have watched any of my previous content, I'm going to highlight this real quickly here. Generally, whoever gets the first shot off in a vehicle 1v1 engagement is going to be the winner. This isn't critical. You want to make sure you know where their armor is at all times and get the first shot off. Because generally whoever gets the first shot off, the opponent has to retreat. And if you're in an engagement range where you can actually chase them down and stop them from escaping, that's even better. But once again, don't get baited. Some people that are decent at tanking or good at tanking, what they will do, they'll try and bait you into a situation where they think you can win it. But you will come around the corner, they've got enough time to get a full repair off in their health. You're down now an extra shell or two as well, and you might get into a situation where you ran out of ammo, and they can just shoot you as freely as they want, and you're the one that gets sent back to the spawn screen. Now, before I go on to the final bit of advice, I just want to take a chance to mention that this video is going a lot longer than what my usual videos are. I put a lot more effort into it, and I want this to not be so overwhelming, especially for people that are new to this game or new viewers to my channel. What I will do is, if there's anything I missed in the finer details of the print, I will make a small bite-sized chunk information video on those, so then you can generally stick to topics that you want to be covered a little bit more without overwhelming you too much. Now, the final tip I want to go on to about is, don't be afraid to go into the bot-only server and get comfortable with the tank. Get comfortable with how it moves, get comfortable with the loadouts that you use, get comfortable with the shell trajectory, the lead on the machine guns, everything. Or even just practicing getting in and out of the vehicle and how to use the repair tool. This is the most useful tool I think they've actually put into the game. So it gives you a chance, if you're all fresh, new to even FPS games, yet alone vehicles, it gives you a place where you can be safe and comfortable and learning. because sometimes being thrown into a whole bunch of players that have been sweating the game for thousands of hours. Lucky enough, this game is early in its lifespan as of from the creation of this video, that you might be able to still get away and play in public lobbies and you'll be fine off. But once the game gets to 2 years, 3 years, or even more, it's going to be really hard for you to jump into the game and keep up with everybody without being absolutely destroyed and even get a chance to really learn from your mistakes. You're going to learn from your mistakes regardless, no matter what, but at the level of the quality that the information you take in, if you're just getting absolutely destroyed with no real notes, it's all for nothing. Also, another thing that I forgot to mention is make sure you use the HUD, which you can see in the bottom left side of the screen. It has a lot of information telling you where you are on the map, how to move, and where the enemy are. Also, one last fact, tree release block projectiles from the tank. Cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. It was a lot longer and way more in-depth information. Hopefully you guys got to the end of this video and enjoyed that, or you just went through the chapters that you were seeking more information about and took in that as well. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's video, highly recommend giving a subscription, keeping in tune for other content that are coming out, and I highly recommend dropping some comments below about some topics you would like for me to cover over, or something that you might want to try and enjoy. Like, the possibilities of Portal at the moment give you so many cool ideas. We can come up with some crazy funny videos if you want, like a cheesy what if a tank versus 100 EOD bots or something like that. I don't mind doing some stuff like that on the side. It'd be kind of funny and cool and relaxing at the same time. Anyway, enjoy guys, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.